Well, just over an hour ago, an hour and 5 minutes ago, at 9 o'clock this morning, the government officially launched a new NHS Test and Trace system. This was for England. As of right now, you could receive a phone call from a contact tracer from the NHS, and they would say that you have been in contact with an infected person, and the instruction would be isolate for 14 days. So you look at this and you see the headlines today, and this is reflective of most of the papers. They're calling this a revolution. OK, well, we're delighted that the Secretary of State for Health, Matt Hancock, has found time in his busy schedule to talk to us today about this. Mr Hancock, good morning to you.
Good morning. Thank you very much for having me on.
Well, having you on to explain, because, you know, this will be a new way of doing things from here on in. Please, could you just spell out to our viewers, people who want to do the right thing, what should be, what will be their new way of life?
Well, that's right, Eamonn, and we're asking people to do two things. The first is that if you have symptoms of coronavirus, isolate immediately and please ask for a test. You can get that on the NHS website, nhs.uk/coronavirus, or by calling 119. And then the second thing is that when people test positive, and sadly people still do, then they will get a call from NHS Test and Trace, from a clinician who will talk to them about who they've been in close contact with. And the NHS will then contact those people because they're at higher risk. And this is the second thing we want people to do. If you get a call from NHS Test and Trace saying that you've been in close contact with somebody who's tested positive, then you please follow the instructions from the NHS, which will be to isolate for up to 14 days. And the goal here is that we have a more targeted approach to lockdown. So individuals who are higher risk are locked down, and that will allow us safely to be able to lift some of the wider lockdown measures, which, as we were just hearing, are having such a damaging impact.
Health Secretary, if a person gets that call and they have to self-isolate, they're in a household of, say, with 3 other people, do the other people have to self-isolate for 14 days?
No, they don't. So if somebody has tested positive, then their household has to self-isolate. That's been the rules for some time now, for at least since mid-March. The new rule is that if you get a call, so even if you're healthy, even if you haven't got any symptoms, even if, like me, you've had coronavirus, if you've been in close contact with someone who tests positive, then you need to isolate, but the rest of your household does not, because it's you who's at risk. Now, if you get symptoms, of course, then you need to call for a test. And if that's positive, at that point, your household does have to isolate. But if you don't have symptoms, then it's only you who needs to isolate if you get this call from NHS Test and Trace.
This is all about breaking the chain of transmission. So no one's saying this is going to be easy, but it may be inconvenient, it may be complicated. Here's a call from Zoe. This is on Twitter. And Zoe says, if you get the call and you're told to isolate for 14 days, then on day 15 you go shopping. Is it possible you can get another call and then have to constantly stay in? I suppose in theory that's true.
Yes, in theory that's true, and the best thing you can do to avoid that is follow the social distancing rules. Because the definition of close contact and why you get that call asking you to self-isolate, that definition is the same thing that has underpinned our social distancing rules. So if you stay more than 2 meters away from people who are outside your household, then you will not be coming into close contact with people. Similarly, in the workplace, we have clear guidelines for how to do social distancing in the workplace. And if people follow those guidelines for social distancing in the workplace, staying more than 2 meters apart, then they won't have that close contact. So the same science underpins the rules that we've been living by on social distancing and the rules that will determine what is a close contact.
You've called this, Health Secretary, a game changer. It's only a game changer if people do it.
Yes.
Do you still think the public have enough faith in the way you and the government are dealing with this pandemic? that they will listen to your advice and stay at home for 14 days?
Yes, we've been testing this with people, and obviously we've had a lot of feedback since we launched it last night. And I'm confident that the vast majority of people will do as per the instructions from the NHS. In the same way that if your NHS doctor said that you're under doctor's orders to self-isolate for any other health condition, that's what the vast majority of people would do. And we've been trialling this approach on the Isle of Wight. It's a long-standing process that Public Health England have used in the past for smaller outbreaks of infectious diseases. So we're highly confident. And also, it's in everybody's interest that we all do this if we're instructed to do it by the NHS,
yes,
because
all of that was before. But all of that, Secretary of State, was before the Cummings Effect, right? So that's the elephant in the room we've got to talk about here. You're trusting people to do this. You're not enforcing people to do this, and a lot of people may be less trustful. They may be less compliant. What do you think that the Cummings Effect is?
Well, I think
what would you say to somebody who would say, well, you lot don't do it, why should we do it? That's really who you're trying to appeal to now. What would you say to them?
I would say that there's a reason that we're asking you to do this, and it's not, for us, it's not for me, it's not for the government, it's for your family, it's for your community, it's for the country, because we can only come through this together. And so it's incredibly important, and it's in everybody's interest that we all follow these instructions from the NHS. And I think that's a really important part of this. Ultimately, we are all on the same side in the fight against this virus. We all want to tackle it. And this is a really important component of tackling it in a way that will be safer to make some of the other changes to the national lockdown. If you like, we've had a sort of isolation for everybody, and now we're trying to make it more and more targeted as the number of new cases comes down. So it's just so important that people do follow the instructions from the NHS.
And if they don't follow these instructions, I mean, you said, you'd like to think it's people's civic duty. You said for the community, protect the NHS. If they don't do it, can you see the government imposing penalties further down the line?
Yes, I hope we don't have to do that. But I do have the legal powers that Parliament granted at the start of the crisis to be able to put in enforcement. But we think it'd be much better if this is done on a voluntary basis. As I say, in the same way that if your doctor told you to isolate for any other medical condition, it is far better done voluntarily. And it is people doing this for themselves and for, as I say, the civic duty. It's our responsibility as citizens so that we can get through this as well as we possibly can as a country.
Yeah. Health Secretary, tell us more, because, you must be party to all sorts of algorithms that predict trends and tell us the way things are going or the way they could be going. If we all stick to the rules, if we all stick to what you're telling us to do now, is the end in sight, and if so, when?
Well, things have definitely been improving in the last few weeks. There is good news. Now, I'm cautious about this because people are still sadly dying from this disease, and 412 people yesterday. That is still an awful lot of people. And so I'm naturally cautious. And anyway, it's my job as Health Secretary to be careful and cautious and safety first. But it's undoubtedly true that things are getting better. We're able to lift some of the measures. I hope that we'll soon be able to allow families to see each other again at more than 2 meters to keep that safe distance, and lift some more of the measures. And the thing is that the more people who follow the instructions with this new test and trace system, the more people are going to be able to get the benefit of the lifting of the wider lockdown. So I am more optimistic. I've seen data that has made me quite positive in the last couple of weeks. The number of new cases coming down, the number of people in hospital coming down, the number of people attending hospital for the first time is now almost an eighth of what it was at the height of the crisis. So things are definitely moving in the right direction. Everybody's played their part in getting us there, and we've just got to keep at it. We've got to keep our resolve.
A few weeks ago on this very programme, you weren't too hopeful about foreign holidays. You talked about that. Today, the news that EasyJet is looking to cut a third of its staff. Is that in itself a reason to revisit or rethink what we as a country, you as a government, are thinking about quarantine?
Well, we have been looking very carefully at this, and the rules on quarantine and international travel are important, and they'll be coming in just over a week's time. And of course, this crisis has had a massive impact on airlines across the world, and my heart goes out to those who are working in airlines for whom there's just been an absolutely enormous impact. I am a little bit more optimistic than I was about being able to get some foreign travel back up, so that is one of the things where things have gone a bit better than expected.
So are you going to rethink the quarantine? I think that's the thing. A lot of people who we've talked to on this show say, actually, I would get on a plane if I was allowed to go to Spain or Portugal or Greece. What's putting them off would be coming back and having to spend 2 weeks in quarantine. So is that something that you're revisiting, something that you're maybe having second thoughts about?
We're going to bring it in on the 8th of June. We keep that under review. So in the same way that there's a 3-weekly review of the overall lockdown measures, and in fact, the deadline for that is today. So after this, that's the next thing that I'm going to do. In the same way that we review those rules every 3 weeks, we have a similar regular review for the quarantine rules. And of course, we'll keep that under review. But it is important, and especially now that the number of new infections is much lower than it was at the peak, it means that those coming from abroad are just a bigger proportion of the overall infections. So the quarantine rules are important, and we'll follow. Again, we'll keep watching and try to do everything we can to allow the relaxation of freedoms. But you'll understand, we'll only do that when it's safe to do so.
But it's obviously now not out of the question for people to maybe have their fingers crossed about a July foreign holiday.
Well, I absolutely wouldn't rule it out. We've got to proceed cautiously. We've seen what happens when this virus gets out of control. And we have, as a country, managed to get it back under control, and we've protected the NHS, the two absolutely core goals right at the start of this. And that's been a team effort from everybody in the country, frankly. So we'll proceed cautiously and carefully, but I definitely wouldn't say no. And I know how important it is for so many people.
Yeah, and there must be immense pressure on your shoulders, of course, this balance between public health and a balance between the country going completely bankrupt, broke, industries closing down. We see how that we've talked about the travel industry there. The hospitality industry is another area where that 2-metre rule again could be under review, I'm assuming, from what you're saying, if we stick to the plan, if things continue to get better.
Well, that's right. And, the overall purpose of the new NHS Test and Trace procedure that's just started is that we essentially have more targeted individual lockdowns for people who are higher risk. And that means that we can safely and carefully release the lockdown on everybody. In the peak of the pandemic, when there were, we thought, up to 100,000 new cases a day, we just had to, the only option was to lock down everything to get the thing under control. But now I hope a much more targeted approach. And the truth is, Eamonn, it's absolutely straightforward. The more people who follow the instructions from the NHS, the more that we can safely lift the other measures. And that's why it's so important that people do follow those rules when they're asked.
Talking of lifting other measures, we're hoping, many more shops will be open on June the 15th. So many people, myself included, desperate for haircuts.
Yes.
I don't wish to sound glib, and we know we're not over this. And yes, well, yours is looking all right, actually, Health Secretary. Is someone cutting it for you?
My wife cut it.
Very good.
And I think she did a fantastic job.
But
I was
seriously,
actually inspired by watching Phillip have his cut on video last time I was on this programme. So,
but if you can open department stores with social distancing, is it something you could look at to say, if have a hair salon, because a lot of these hair salons are struggling, they probably will go out of business, many of them, if they can't get back to work soon. If they're wearing visors, if we're wearing masks, they're wearing gloves, we don't have a drink, is there a way that you could get the hairdressing salons unlocked? It
would be really good for morale, for the nation, one would have thought.
Well, I would love to be able to do that. And the way to do that is to make sure that when it's safe to do so, the hairdressing is brought back in a way that itself is safe. So, you know, the protective equipment, but you do have to be in close contact with people in order to cut their hair. I mean, it's just natural. And so it is one of the...
If they were wearing a visor, you know, the proper Perspex visors and gloves, all their equipment is very, you know, they're very hygienic anyway. Myself, as a customer, you know, a client, I was wearing a mask and gloves and I don't have a drink, don't have anything to eat, and you're socially distanced from the next chair. I know that it's close contact, but surely that's not different from a lot of things that we're already doing, like getting on tubes, getting on buses, going back to work.
Yes, it is it's a challenge because inevitably you have to be close, but it's not an insurmountable challenge.
So you will look at it?
We are doing, and working on what it would look like to have those the protective equipment, exactly as you say, in place. And you know, hairdressing is just like so many other industries. We're doing everything we can to support them through what is inevitably an incredibly difficult time.
So could they possibly, could you look at that same timeline you're looking at for June the 15th for some shops and department stores? Could that be something you could look at June the 15th for opening hair salons?
I can't commit to doing it on that timetable, but I can commit to working with the hairdressing industry. I already am, and talking to some of their representatives who are making this case and seeing how we could go about it. But of course, I'm sure that everybody understands that it's got to be done in a way that's safe to do.
Of course, of course.
Mr. Hancock, I've never met Mrs. Hancock, but she's obviously a very intelligent person, and I see that she's very cleverly replaced the mirror in your living room there with that beautiful portrait of the Queen, so that you can't see that haircut. Oh dear.
I'm at work.
Thank you very much indeed for your time today. Thanks for being so enlightening about things. We hope your test and trace, the tracking system, is a revolution. We all need it. We all need to follow it for us all to stay safe and well, yourself included. Thank you very much for your time.
Great to be on. Thank you.
Thank you very much indeed.